Is my lighting okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome in, everybody. This is an impromptu live edition of the Always Irish Show. With me is Nathan _Urbach. If you have watched my show before, you know that I've had Nathan on before to talk about all things Notre Dame recruiting. This is no different. We have a lot of news. You had the initial early signing day, and then even today, Notre Dame had some good news and activity. It's a perfect time to bring Nathan on. Welcome in, my friend. What's new?
I'm great, John. I know me and you've been talking about getting together here for a little bit, and no greater time with signing day pretty much finished up, or the early signing period essentially over, and the ACC championship tomorrow. And I know you were on with Pigskin Pete yesterday, and you guys were talking about the ultimate troll job that Notre Dame can accomplish tomorrow, and hopefully that ends up happening. And this recruiting class, I think, as we'll get into, it has benefited a lot from this season as well.
Yeah, I told him on the show, I can't even allow myself to think about what it would be like if we pulled this off, because it would just be the most epic troll job ever. I'm not even thinking about how good that would feel. So here's just between me and you. We've worked together the last few years, mostly talking recruiting usually. And just from our interactions offline through text or whatever else, I really feel like you have a high excitement level about this particular Notre Dame recruiting class. Am I right in assuming that? I feel like you got you're a little juiced up about this class. Am I right in thinking that I'm getting that vibe from you this year?
Yeah, no, and I don't know if you remember last year when you had me on around this time as well. I mentioned that the top 7 or so for the 2020 class was up there with pretty much everyone. And this year I feel very similarly. I think from like a top 7, 8, maybe even like top 9 standpoint, I think it compares with, even those teams like at the top that, you see 5 or 6 5-stars on their list. Notre Dame's never going to get 5 or 6 5-stars in a recruiting cycle, so you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt anyway. But when you really dive into fits for the program, both academically and guys that can really might not be stars from day one, but when they do get on the field, and I'll bring up an example here. I know we'll get into some names here soon, but the guy they just landed from the kid that flipped from LSU, Kari G, he reminds me so much of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah when he was a recruit. He was a higher 3-star kid that at the end of his recruiting cycle started to get some big name players. Kari G's a little different in the sense that he had Clemson, LSU, and a bunch of big names on him pretty early. So, from that standpoint, his junior film was tremendous as well. But just from he's 6'2", 6'3", 185, 190, but a lot of people think he can grow into, an elite rover in this specific defense. That's the type of kid that, right now he's a 3-star. I think if you look at 24/7 Sports, he's Notre Dame's top 3-star. But I could see him being a first-round pick in 3 or 4 years. And so when Notre Dame's able to land kids like that specifically, you're gonna reap those rewards down the line. And that's not even talking about some of the other guys that are probably way ahead of him, at least from a ranking standpoint and a popularity standpoint with the Notre Dame fans.
Yeah, there's a couple big picture things that I think I'm noticing. One is I feel like Notre Dame's starting to do a better job of honing in on exactly what they're trying to identify with some of these guys, like whether it be personality fit at Notre Dame, athletically, where they're trying to peg them. But I feel like the last few years, I don't know how to describe it other than saying I feel like they're tightening up their operation to where they know exactly what they're looking for, how they're going to do it, where things are going to fit. And I feel like that gives me some comfort. Like, does that make sense what I'm saying? I feel like they have a pretty damn good idea of what they're trying to do, how they're going to do it, identifying the right kids. I just feel like they're tightening the operation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that has a lot to do with post 2016 Brian Kelly and what he's been able to put together as a staff. They have, I mean, obviously Mike Elko, Clark Lee, that tandem has identified, a really incredible defensive, unit. And they've been able to land the proper kids. I mean, obviously I mentioned the rover position, which is sort of the most talked about position in that defense. But at the same time, they've also had really dominant players that have played there. I mean, Drew Tranquil, pretty much went straight from that to Owusu Koromoa last year. And they're continuing to recruit at a high level for that position. So it's also on top of that, it's a system that's now been around for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And that includes the offense. I mean, Tommy Rees has made his own offense of sorts with Notre Dame, but at the same time, it was sort of just an extension of the Chip Long offense. I mean, Chip Long was the tight end coach. He loved using tight ends. He maybe didn't run the ball as much as Rees has shown, but I also think Rees is adapting to what the strengths are to the team. And that shows in his play calling and his coaching. So, no, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with continuity in the coaching staff and, just how long they've been able to prepare to get kids into that.
Yeah. It's just one thing that sticks out to me, and I like it. It gives me comfort. I just feel like there's less loose ends, less rolling the dice. I feel like they're really starting to get into a sweet spot comfort zone and what they're looking for and making it work. And that's encouraging to me. Here's something else I like. And this is a question for you. I noticed in this class alone, we had 8 guys that are flipped from committed somewhere else. That seems to be more than we normally get as far as flipping guys from other schools. Is that just random this year? Is it COVID? Is it beating Clemson? Like what's the I love the idea. To me, getting a recruit to pick you out of 10 schools is great. When you could get a kid to commit somewhere and then you poach them, that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. What do you make of us having 8 flips in this cycle?
I mean, I think a lot of what you said is really, and there's a lot to it. I mean, I think part of it is, kids that probably would have ended up at Notre Dame regardless. Notre Dame decided to take a lot of kids this cycle. That was probably COVID related. I mean, last year they only took 17 or 16, I think, after Landon Bartleson ended up not in the class late because of his legal issues. So, I mean, obviously taking, 27, 28 kids is a big part of that. But one thing I've noticed out of the staff and just in recent years in general is they really find kids late in the cycle that, they're like, hey, maybe we didn't land this kid. Let's go out and find some other ones. They have a secondary option. So a guy like David Apu, the kid, the DN that they flipped from UCLA, that's a very similar thing to like the Jeremiah Owusu-Koromoa flip a few years back. So has some length, has some really good athleticism, and academically and socially fits in at a school like Notre Dame. And you identified him a little bit later in the cycle, and that's just a kid that's probably going to come to Notre Dame all the time. But then you have a guy like Phillip Reilly who committed to Notre Dame, so obviously had an interest level there to begin with, flips to USC, and then part of the reason he flips back is because of how great Notre Dame's done. I mean, I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about, at least from that standpoint. I mean, Phillip Reilly, at least in my opinion, is one of the top 5 or 6 kids in this class, regardless of his recruiting ranking. So you're gonna, that's a kid that I think you seriously flipped because of, the season you're having. And then I already mentioned Kari G. Kari G 5 months ago when he put out his top 10 list didn't even have Notre Dame in it. And then he's calling Notre Dame 2 weeks ago to find a way into this class. So, and like I mentioned, he had LSU and Clemson as his final 2 at the beginning of all this. So he's a kid that the big boys wanted. I mean, LSU was coming off a national championship. Clemson's Clemson. And he could have picked any of those teams prior to obviously Clemson losing to Notre Dame and so on and so forth. So a lot of it, I mean, I think, like you said, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to this class specifically. A lot of them are just guys that would have ended up regardless. But at the same time, there's definitely a few in there that, it absolutely has to do with the success on the field.
Yeah. And that's always been what we say. If Notre Dame has one of these great years, it'll boost recruiting and all of that. So, but the 8 flip stands out to me, and I like it. Anytime you go poaching, I'm all for that. Like it's all fair game. So that excites me. Here's something else. And I think we're seeing this play out this year in front of us on the field. It's something I've asked for. I've talked about forever. We're seeing it more and more each year. And that is finding these guys in these recruiting classes that can get out there on the field early and not only contribute, but to compete with the upperclassmen, raise the level of a whole position group. That's the other thing with younger guys playing. I always say I want younger guys to play. Even some guys that aren't getting to do that right away, they're at least competing, pushing those older guys that don't want to lose their spot. Now you look at a guy like Tyree and Mayer, and even in the secondary, we have a guy playing that I don't think a lot of people thought was going to, Clarence out there. So my question is, who out of this class can give us that again? Who do you think has a chance to get out there early the first couple years, build depth, and make plays?
I mean, the first name that comes to mind is Prince Collie, the linebacker out of Tennessee. I think Kelly even spoke about this yesterday or Wednesday in his, kind of his intro press conference for the class. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's necessarily your starting rover year one. And he was a kid that Clark Lee had a really good relationship with. And, there was some talk that he was wavering, in the last couple of days because of everything going on. So, I mean, he's definitely a guy. He's my number 2 ranked player in the class. So it really lines up with, just how I feel about him as well. A lot of the strengths in this class are on the offensive line, of course, and we know how Notre Dame really operates with offensive line play. I wouldn't necessarily expect any of those guys to play year one. Especially with the recruits that they have, from years past. But a lot of those guys I think are ready-made. I mean, Rocco Spindler, Blake Fisher are both huge guys that I think are almost physically ready to play. Fisher might need to cut down a little bit and just kind of get used to a college, program before all that. But I think Rocco Spindler could probably be the right guard of the future, maybe from year one, but I wouldn't necessarily put my money on it. And then the name that maybe a lot of people won't agree with just because he missed his senior season with the California COVID rules. But Tyler Buckner, man, I mean, he only really got 1 year of high school play, and it wasn't against maybe the greatest competition. The kid just balls. You put him on the field, and he's just, I hate to bring up a Jerkovic, comp here to an extent because that's not going to go a long way with Notre Dame fans these days, but I don't care how well he practices. I have a feeling he's probably a great practice player just based on what I've heard about him as a person and everything like that. But Clark might have some injury issues with that knee. Drew Pine, I mean, obviously he's only going to be a second-year kid. I don't think Ron Powlus is the future of
he's going to win 4 Heismans just like his dad did.
But so, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't able to bring in, a transfer that can play right away. It wouldn't surprise me if Buckner won that job and they just said, "Hey, we're going to have you come in. You're gonna grow with the young wide receiver and tight end core that we have, and you're going to be the guy from day one." And it's all going to depend on if he's ready in terms of obviously missing a full year, but he's an early enrollee. That obviously helps from a playbook standpoint, and I know he has a good relationship with Tommy Rees. So he's definitely a guy I'm looking at.
Yeah, the quarterback dynamic is really going to be interesting. That is, of course, if Ian Book doesn't decide to come back because he has a free year due to COVID. But yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch moving forward. Now, here's something else, and I think I want to credit the Notre Dame staff for this, which is something I don't always do until I feel they earn it. But I think they're starting to prove it. When you look at the guy, not only just how many wins we've had the last 4 years, really, really good. But when you look at the guys that we end up putting into the league, it lends me to believe Notre Dame's doing a better job at developing these guys to become NFL monsters. And a lot of them are guys that don't come in as the 5-star guy that I want, but they end up developing. They change their body type, get them where they need to be, develop them, and then they pump out NFL talent at only a similar pace to Alabama, Ohio State, and a couple other schools, Clemson. So with that being said, who do you think isn't going to get a lot of attention out of this list, but that could develop into being an animal?
I mean, Joe Alt is a kid with NFL bloodlines. I mean, he's starting to get some good recognition. I mean, on 24/7 Sports, he's now a 4-star and actually a pretty legitimate one on their website. But he's a kid that I think could be a first-round pick down the line if he can continue to sculpt that body into, like that prototypical left tackle. He's a huge human being. So, I mean, he's got a lot of just raw potential there. A couple guys down the list. I mean, we know Mike Elson's going to develop defensive linemen. He's proven that. So a guy like Devin Apu, who I already mentioned, Jason Onyé out of Rhode Island. Those are two guys that I think maybe year 1, year 2, you're not seeing them too much, but those guys are, very, very much like Adi Ogundeji, where, maybe it takes a few years, but really he surprises maybe as a year 2 or year 3 guy and is really in that rotation and maybe even as a starter. So those guys have a lot of potential, I think. I even think Onyé could move inside if need be as well. I think he has the body type to do that. And then, I mean, kind of staying on the defensive line, even a guy like Will Schweitzer out of California, he played a lot of linebacker early on in his in his high school career, but he's kind of settled in as a pass rusher and a Viper candidate for Notre Dame. He's a kid that I'm looking at that down the line could end up being a really good, NFL prospect. He's got length and he's got speed and all the, the prerequisites that you want out of a pass rusher, especially in the Notre Dame defense. And then, I mean, it's hard to go without even talking about the wide receivers. Dion Kolze really represents what Notre Dame has recruited well at the position with the big-bodied receivers that can go up and win the 50-50 ball, make it more of a 90-10 ball. I mean, you're seeing Javon McKinley and Ben Skowronek really continue that trend this year. Lorenzo Styles, I still think, has a lot of upside as a defensive back if that were to end up happening, but he's also just super dynamic as a wide receiver. For me, he's more polished than Braden Lenzy was coming out, but almost very similar in the sense that he's the guy that can take the top off the defense. He can be a punt returner, a kick returner for you. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's doing both of those things year 1 and sort of taking the load off of, how Chris Tyree was doing that this year. I think Styles is actually probably, at least from a ready-made standpoint, to do that. I think he did it so much in high school, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's their punt returner and kick returner year 1 and, maybe doing some Braden Lenzy stuff from last year as a starting player. But no, those are the type of guys that I'd really look at for, at least from a skill position standpoint wise, guys that can really make an impact at the NFL level as well. Yeah, it's obvious they're doing a really good job, and now the on-field results are matching up with it. It's really encouraging. They kind of, it's hard not to say Notre Dame's kind of got it going right now. And one question I have is, with the news with Clark Lee coming when it did, that could have really disrupted this class, couldn't it? Or are those guys just, they're going to go because they buy into Notre Dame as everything that goes in with going to Notre Dame, not necessarily one guy? But I put myself in the position of a recruit. And if I have that relationship with that guy for multiple years, get comfortable with him, and then he's gone, it would be uncomfortable for me. So I think we got to give Notre Dame credit. They held that all together as smoothly as possible. Don't you agree? Right. And I think some of it has to do, you can almost say the timing was perfect to an extent. I mean, if it would have came 3 weeks prior, you got these kids that are able to talk to schools for a lot longer that can, maybe convince them of at least holding off from signing. But with the news coming like 3 days before signing day, I think it's really hard. I mean, obviously me and you are Notre Dame people at heart, so it's a lot easier said than done for us. But, Notre Dame offers me or you a scholarship, we're saying hell yeah right away. But for a guy like Prince Collie, for example, Clark Lee was not only his defensive coordinator, but he was his position coach and his lead recruiter. So that's something that, you have that suddenly taken from you, whether or not you believed it could have happened down the road or not. It's just you got to sit back and at least think about it. And that's pretty much everything I've read and everything I've heard is that's really all what happened. There was no – he wasn't fielding calls from other teams. I mean, people were calling him, but he wasn't necessarily being like receptive to it. He just needed a few days to step back and really figure out what was best for him. And, and I think, like I said, because it was only a few days and he wasn't necessarily going to take those calls from other programs, that probably ended up helping Notre Dame in the long run. And then obviously with, like Nick Lazinski coming in, I think there's a good chance he's promoted to linebacker coach. Especially if they stay in-house with their defensive coordinator, like promoting Mike Elston or something like that. If Lazinski's the linebacker coach, I think that was definitely something that was going to sway Collie a little bit. And then obviously just the relationship building with Brian Polian and Brian Kelly as well.
Yeah. Speaking of the defensive coordinator position, here's something I've been thinking about since the Lee news broke. A lot of times if a guy's not getting another job promoted, you're switching defensive coordinators because things have gone bad. And when things go bad, people just want something different, new ideas, fresh ideas. That's not the situation Notre Dame's in since the defense has been really, really good. Is that a strong argument to maybe promote from within for continuity because things are working so well? Or do you still think it would be advantageous to look outside? I know a lot of people like the Cincinnati guy. What do you think of that dynamic?
I mean, I'm always a fan of bringing in the best talent. So if that's in-house, then great. If it's not, then also good, also great. I mean, I to a certain extent, I think Clark Lee's defense, at least from the 3-5-3 look or whatever they run, with the rover as essentially an additional defensive back or a linebacker, depending on what you're playing. A lot of defenses are kind of, they have their own variation of that. So even if you brought in a guy like, say, Marcus Freeman or Tyler Stockton from Ball State or whoever it is that's from the outside, they can adapt their defense enough to make a guy like a Prince Collie or whoever, Paul Mawala, whoever's going to be the rover, feel like they still have a spot, in that defense. I'm not too worried from that standpoint. I say bring in the best guy. Marcus Freeman's probably that, but at the same time, then he's probably out the door in a year or two anyway. So maybe there's an argument to be said that you don't want, to have him have 1 foot out the door already. Clark Lee was a little bit different considering when he was promoted, he was a linebacker coach. It wasn't like he came in as an already, highly touted defensive coordinator. So you knew he'd be around for 2 to 3 years. And we didn't really know what we were going to get out of him to begin with when he was first hired. Marcus Freeman's probably a guy that, next year, if he really wanted to, could get a Power 5 gig, just like Clark Lee did. So no, I mean, with the way the college landscape is these days with coaches, taking promotions and leaving and going from school to school, I think you just bring in the best guy. And I think most kids that are on the roster and are as recruits, they pretty much understand that at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you think this class, it's one thing to compare it to the top recruiting classes. You already know who those names are going to be. Alabama and Ohio State. Their 2 classes seem outrageously talented to me. Top heavy, big time talent. So I'm not going to ask that. What I am going to ask is, how do you feel like this class stacks up to other Brian Kelly recent classes? Not in terms of how it plays out, because we don't know that. But just looking at on the front end, the names in front of you, is there any trends you're noticing or ways this is going where it's a little different than the last few classes, or the good year helped and you think it'll be better because of that? Where do you think this falls in Brian Kelly's recent classes?
I mean, it's certainly a unique class with the size and COVID. A lot of these kids haven't even or barely been to campus, or maybe spoken to the coaches on Zoom and not really met them. So I do think, almost to a certain extent, even though this is I think the eighth ranked class on 24/7 Sports right now, it's sort of underrated to an extent. I mean, you got a lot of 3-star guys. I mean, I think it's 12 4-stars. You got 15 3-stars.
You're leading me into my question. So,
I think on a typical year, this would be a class I would look at and say, hey, they have a lot of kids, and that's why it's ranked highly. Not that it wouldn't be, not that they don't have quality players. I mean, we've talked about it here for, 30 minutes or so already, that I do think that they have a really quality class. But a lot of these guys didn't even play their senior year of high school. So, I don't want to mention the same guy over and over again, but Kari G. I mean, he's a 3-star kid on 24/7 Sports. Look at his offer list. Look at who he decommitted from. Look at who his top 2 were prior to ending up at Notre Dame when it's all said and done. I mean, you got LSU, Clemson, and Notre Dame, Auburn, whoever as your in your top 4 to 5 teams. I mean, that's a really talented player, at least from my perspective. And then you turn on the tape, and at least for me, it backs it up. But then, on the flip side of that, you have a guy like Prince Collie, who did play his senior year of high school. And obviously, Kari G did play his senior year, so I used him as an example in a different way. Prince Collie did play his senior year, is probably going to win the Buckus Award for high school linebackers, and moved up significantly. I think when Notre Dame offered him, he was a very low 4-star, maybe even a 3-star at one time, and now he's ranked in the top 100 recruits in the country. So, to a certain extent, it goes both ways. But at the end of the day, I think that they have 4 or 5 guys that if they were to play their senior years could very well be 4-stars right now.
Interesting. Just because I have to ask it, or I wouldn't be true to myself. I'm sitting there on 247. I'm looking at the team rankings. I'm looking at the stars. Here's what I noticed. Of that top 10 where it sits now, Notre Dame has 15 3-stars. Florida also has double-digit 3-stars. Nobody else in the top 8 above them has even half as many 3-stars. So my question to you is there that big of a gap between the top of a 3-star and the bottom of a 4? But it does jump out to you when you look at that and you see those top teams only have 2, 3, 4 3-stars, and then it's all 4 and 5. What is that difference? Is it always people that don't follow recruiting the way you do see 3 and think average? That's just what you think. You got
right.
1, 2, 3, and then 5. And that's why a lot of Notre Dame people don't get that excited about a 3-star kid when 5's the best. Talk us down from that.
I mean,
what do you make of it? It's you I know these guys can develop and all that, and you can't make a determination off that. But when most regular fans don't see these kids film, they see the star ranking and they think 5's great, 3's whatever. But I don't think that's always true. And Notre Dame's proving that with their development and NFL players. Explain to us how that all works.
Well, and like I said, this year's it's just so much different than previous years. If this was, and I'm going to flip-flop this into last year's class, because last year, and this is where fans bother me to a certain extent when it comes to recruiting. Last year, Notre Dame only signed, 17 kids or whatever. But their rating as an overall group was significantly higher than this year's because they signed, on average, just more 4-stars to 3-stars. And the only thing people wanted to talk about was, they finished, in the 17 to 20 range. Now they have 27 kids, or maybe even more once it's all said and done, and their average rating's a little bit lower. Now, like I said, I already got into that. I think a lot of that has to do with COVID to a certain extent. I think a lot of these kids are better than their rankings. And I'm not saying that just as a Notre Dame homer. I evaluate their film, and I think a lot of these kids would have significantly upgraded and still could. I mean, a lot of these guys that played their senior season just haven't had a bump in the rankings yet. Logan Diggs is the kid I think could end up being a 4-star. Hopefully, obviously, ends up at Notre Dame when it's all said and done. But I think he could be a 4-star, come the final rankings. But, but a lot of getting back to the point, a lot of these people now look at the ranking and they say, well, they're in the top 10, but why do they have all these 3-stars? And in my level of thinking, I don't see how you can have it both ways. You either are going to be happy that Notre Dame or whoever your team is gets a top 10 class because that's what people want, because that's all I heard last year once Kelly made his comments. Kelly wants top 5 classes. Kelly wants top 10 classes. Well, what if Kelly signed 60 kids? They were all 3-star kids. He's going to end up with a top 5 classes because of the numbers.
Okay, well then they need to refine their equation then.
I agree.
Okay, because all those, who else used to do this? Tennessee used to get 34 guys, and they're always up there, and they never win any games ever. Yep. But they used to oversign 32, 33. Ole Miss used to have 50 freaking guys. So they need to refine their equation then, if that's how it breaks out. But I've been a guy who says you got to figure out how to get in that top 10. I don't care how you do it, get it in there. But I got to say this, Nathan.
Yeah.
I am genuinely starting to trust and respect this staff's judgment in who they get and what they think they could turn it into. Because as the last few years have gone by, I'm pretty damn impressed. And a lot of those guys that we're putting in the league didn't come 5-star, the top guy in a class I'm flipping out about. So as these last few years have gone by and I see the on-field results in NFL drafts, I'm starting to give the staff more leeway to be like, you know what? They're going to turn this into something, and I'm fine with it because they're earning that respect from me for what they're doing.
Well, and I kind of got a couple things on that. First, and I want to clarify this, I'm typically a rating versus rankings guy. If I look at Notre Dame class, I don't care if they're ranked 25th or they're ranked 5th, as long as the guys that they sign, I think, are truly elite. But on the flip side, there is something to be said where if you sign a bigger class, especially like what you're talking about with a program like Notre Dame and a staff like Notre Dame that me and you both respect, and we think that they're going to elevate the kids that they sign, you give yourself 10 more kids to have a chance with, that's pretty big. I mean, that's 10 more kids than they signed last year. And their rating, while it's a little bit different, it's not much. It's still a 4-star rating. I think last year's class finished around 90.77 or whatever. And this year, right now, it's 89.68 or whatever. In the grand scheme of things, that's probably one 4-star kid and take out the kicker. And then, boom, it's the same thing. Right. So when you really think about it, I mean, there is kind of, there's a little flip-flop there. The second thing I wanted to point out, and this kind of goes back to my COVID talk when it comes to kids not playing their senior year. If Kyle Hamilton didn't play a senior year of college or of high school ball, he would have been an 87 3-star, a good 3-star that, a lot of Notre Dame fans were like, oh, look at the film. He's a really good player. Someone like me probably would have been, telling fans, hey, this kid's going to be a dude. And then, but because he had a 3-star, like you said, there's going to be the fans that just look at that, and that's fine. And that's fine. I mean, not everybody follows recruiting like other people do. But because he was able to have a senior season and more people saw his tape, he ended up being a 5-star on 24/7 Sports. So he's a good example of a kid that, and I'm not saying all of these kids that Notre Dame signed could have done that. I think Prince Collie is actually a good example of a kid that was able to play his senior season this year. And because of that, I think he might end up being a top 50 kid. But a guy like Devin Apu, even a Kari G, like I said, who has the really good offer list. I mean, just from a ranking standpoint, could have moved. I guess never mind. I shouldn't. I'm getting ahead of myself. Kari G played his senior season, but guys like Devin Apu, even a Tyler Buckner, who kind of slipped in the rankings a little bit because of his, quote unquote, poor performances in camps. what if he would have balled out this year at the school that at Helix, who plays a lot better competition than the school he was at prior. If he was able to play at Helix and kind of put up the similar numbers or just tremendous numbers in general, he'd probably still be a 5-star. So there's a lot of different things that go into this, and I hate to use COVID as an excuse, but I really think that this year was just super unique. And a lot of fans from all schools really just need to take a step back and, especially if you're at a program where you really trust the staff to bring in kids, you gotta hope that those, that continues.
Yeah, those are good points. Okay, I got 2 running back questions. One is, with Logan, how do you think that's going to play out? Traditionally, when a kid steps back, another big offer comes, they're not going to do it early. That traditionally doesn't usually end well for a Notre Dame, since most of their guys know they're going to go there, lock in as early as they can. How are you feeling about that?
I'll be honest, and I don't have inside info on this, so I'm okay saying it. I think he's signed already, and I think he's just kind of playing the game with fans and, whatever. I have a feeling, and just kind of from reading some stuff from people that do know what they're talking about and sort of seeing this kind of play out in different times. Like I know Isaiah Foskey, for example, was a kid. He wasn't like Diggs where he was specifically publicly committed to Notre Dame, but if you followed recruiting, you knew he was signed to Notre Dame prior to his announcement in February or January, whatever it was, a few years back. I haven't been told that, like I said, specifically, but just from reading between the lines and some of the people that I trust in this industry saying, saying some different things, I wouldn't be surprised if he is signed right now. And for whatever reason, I don't know what it would be because he's publicly committed. Maybe he just wants to, kind of pretend like he was really giving, LSU a chance. And I think he was overall, at least for a few weeks or a few days after getting the offer. I wouldn't be surprised if he's already signed. So I have it on pretty good authority that he's probably going to end up in the class anyway. And I'm happy that Notre Dame will hopefully keep him because I think he's a really talented player.
Yeah, and then they got the flip from, how do you pronounce it? Estime? Is that how you pronounce it, from Michigan State?
I was listening to him talk. I think he said Estime, but it's very similar.
Man, I look at that kid. He looks like he's about 42 years old, man. That dude looks like a grown-ass man. Like, even his headshot on 247, you just see the neck, like just those neck muscles to where it doesn't even come down straight. The dude looks jacked. What do you make of him?
Oh, he's huge.
He looks like a freaking monster.
I was working out with my brother-in-law the other day, and I showed him a picture of this kid, and I was like, "Hey, guess his age?" And he said, "Oh, he's probably our age." I'm like, "No, he's 17. He's about to commit to Notre Dame." Now he started laughing.
Like, dude, he looks like a beast, and he hasn't even gotten into the Notre Dame weight program. I mean, geez, he just looks like a 42-year-old with 2 kids at home.
Right.
I mean, geez.
To answer your question on him, though, I think he's actually a really, really unique player. He reminds me of the SEC backs that Alabama's always landing, where those kids look like they're 40 when they come in. Mm-hmm. Very similar to maybe like the guys that Wisconsin gets sometimes too. I mean, I remember when Jonathan Taylor committed to Wisconsin a few years back. A lot of people thought he was a really underrated recruit. Notre Dame was sort of in on him, but never ended up offering. And obviously, look what happened. I mean, A.J. Dillon, that went to Boston College, a really good example as well, ended up being a 2nd-round pick. I think Estime could really turn into one of those type of guys. And I'm using them as more of an example because of his offer list. He was obviously committed to Michigan State, had Rutgers was involved. I mean, a couple other, Big Ten teams and some teams out in the Northeast, but, he didn't have like the 5-star, billing and, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry type that goes to Alabama, but it wouldn't surprise me at the least if he ended up being that type of player down the road.
Does it surprise you at all maybe it doesn't. But does it surprise you at all with Notre Dame's lineage of offensive line play that the top backs in a recruiting class aren't banging down the doors to come run behind a line that puts all their guys in the NFL? Does that surprise you at all? Or is it just a matter of if you're that good and you're down south, you're just going to go to Alabama and then it's fine? But does it surprise you at all with the offensive line lineage? Guys aren't lining, the top guys aren't going, this is a no-brainer, I'm going to run behind them for 3 years.
Yeah, at least a little bit. I mean, it's weird because Notre Dame definitely gets kids intrigued. But like you mentioned, they don't necessarily land them when it's all said and done. I mean, they were in on a lot of talented guys this year. I mean, Will Shipley being one of them, Donovan Edwards, they were trying to flip till the very end. With Edwards, I will say I think Estime and Diggs are very, very much on par with a guy like Edwards, and maybe even Shipley. I mean, I know a lot of people thought Edwards was better than Shipley as well. So those might be two poor examples to an extent. But, they had Kamar Wheaton and LJ Johnson, who are both technically uncommitted right now, that were intrigued for a while, but, didn't really go past that. I mean, definitely to a certain extent. But at the same time, I do think running back might be one of those positions, academically speaking, and sometimes it's hard to bring in a kid. And then like you mentioned, if you're a kid that's from Alabama or Louisiana or Texas or whatever, you can go run behind not necessarily the same caliber of offensive line, but Alabama produces offensive line talent very similarly to the top programs and different things like that. So really where I think Notre Dame can benefit is finding the guys that Wisconsin has found. I mean, Wisconsin is, for all the guys that, Alabama and Georgia and programs like that, have put into the, NFL from a running back standpoint, Wisconsin's right up there, man. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, Corey Clement, the kid that they have this year, Berger, I think is another kid that they found that, Notre Dame was sort of in on as well. If Notre Dame can get kids like that, and then every now and then or every couple of years bring in a Chris Tyree that is just a speed threat that everybody wanted, then I'm fine with that. I mean, give me Estime every year or give me Logan Diggs every year and mix in a Chris Tyree every couple of years, and I'm happy for sure.
What I'm starting to like with what Notre Dame seems to have found in the running back situation is I like the idea that you're getting some guys that are versatile, that could do different things for you. You could throw them out there to catch passes. You could have them return kicks. You can hand it off to them behind center. But I like the dynamic of having multiple guys where their absolute strengths are a little different. I love the flexibility that provides. Like the idea of having Tyree and Kyron out there. Just think of how much that is to defend. And we're not even talking about tight ends or receivers or anything else. Right. So I love seeing them get multiple guys that I think have slightly different strengths on the high end. That's exciting to me. And I think Notre Dame's doing it.
Right. And then, we didn't even really mention Kyrie and not Kyrie. I was about to say Kyrie Irving, Kyron Williams until just now. But he's another good example. He was a 4-star, a 3-star on certain websites. Look at him. He might be Notre Dame's best running back since Julius Jones, in my opinion. I think at least from an NFL standpoint. Now,
eligibility-wise, he's a redshirt freshman this year.
Yeah, correct? So he has one more year before he can even enter the draft. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So,
insane, man. His wiggle and his ability to pass protect, or his willingness, I guess, to pass protect.
Yeah.
His receiving out of the backfield, I think, is he reminds me kind of, I'm going to take two different guys. One guy you'll definitely know because he's the Bears running back, and David Montgomery. He reminds me of maybe a little smaller David Montgomery in the sense that he doesn't necessarily have the home run speed, but just like in between the tackles, don't go down easy, can catch out of the backfield, can do a lot of things for your team that can win games. And then kind of like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire as well, the running back for the Chiefs who was, the star for LSU from a build standpoint, kind of that bowling ball look almost to an extent. I think he's sort of a mix of those dudes. And honestly, like I said, I know, Notre Dame fans and every fan wants to speak up their own guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if we look at Kyron Williams next year as maybe like the top kid in the class from a running back standpoint. I think he's that good.
Yeah, when you watch him come into his own this year, it hits you. If you watch a lot of football, he's a guy where it just hits you like you could teach things, you could coach things, you could scheme things, you could do that. This guy just has a natural inclination for this stuff, and you can't teach it. But he just kind of, the way he even just moves sometimes, it's just like he's not even trying. His body just knows what to do. Like, it's been a joy to watch. Like, and the best part is there's still room for growth. We're not at the top yet. And that's encouraging as well. Anything else about this cycle or this class you want to cover before I ask you a couple ACC title game questions?
No, not really. I mean, I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, I think from, like I said early on when people didn't necessarily hear this at the beginning, but very much like last year, I think like the top, 7 to 10 or so guys can really compete with most teams in the country. And so like from that standpoint, I think fans have a lot to be excited about. And yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna see those benefits not only down the road, but like how we saw Mayer and Tyree and Clarence Lewis and guys like that really show out early on in their careers. I think we're gonna see 3 or 4 guys from this year's class really.
Nathan, I think what you're talking about, I think, is a really important factor of trying to get from really, really good to elite. And I feel like there's some momentum. Now, I might not be saying this tomorrow night at this time, okay? I might not, but I'm in a good mood right now. Nothing bad's happened yet. But I feel like it takes time, but I feel like we're incrementally getting to more of a point that I wanted to be, where I'm seeing young kids out there playing great early, all that. What do you got, a pizza being delivered and they're calling you to tell you it's ready or what?
Sorry, I think I told you I'm on my wife's laptop and she has a Mac, so it's her phone's hooked up to it, and her fucking sister keeps calling her.
I was going to ask you if your dog barks twice, does that mean he likes the recruit or doesn't like the recruit?
I think my dog's similar to you. She's pretty pessimistic, so
that's good. I like that. I like that realistic dog. Okay, so what the hell was I saying? Oh, I feel like I like the trajectory I'm seeing of more and more young guys getting in the mix early. I just feel like that raises the competition level of the entire program. That's just how I feel. And I'm seeing it more and more each year with Notre Dame. That's a good sign to me. These guys are in the mix early, and I like it.
Yeah, and and honestly, and I know we probably want to move on here to the ACC talk, but real quick, a lot of it really has to do with the depth. They're bringing in, I mean, every year Notre Dame brings in like 3 or 4 guys that are going to be really good. It's just the way it is. They recruit at a high level. They're always going to be around that top 10. And even when they're not rankings-wise in the top 10, when you look at the 24/7 does a really good job of this. They have their their roster outlook or whatever. I forgot what it's called exactly, but essentially it loops in everybody that's on the roster and it ranks, where they are. And Notre Dame almost traditionally is like top 5 or 6, which is interesting when you think about it, because they're rarely finished 5 or 6 when it comes down to, the actual rankings. But it's because their kids work out and they stay. They don't necessarily transfer in and out. So you get like the top kids that go to like a Tennessee or something like that. They go and transfer somewhere else down the road or whatever. And then the other thing is they bring in high quality transfers. A guy like Isaiah Pryor or something like that. They're very picky and choosy when it comes to their transfers. They don't bring in, no name guys. And
Nathan, I do think their use of the transfer portal is getting better too. I feel like they are starting to identify guys. Look at Skowronek. Look at what a big part of the offense he is.
And when they landed him,
I feel like they're doing a good job.
And the funny thing is, when they landed him, you had so many people that are like, well, why are we bringing another receiver? We have Austin, we have Lindsey, we have all these kids coming in, Jordan Johnson, the other guys that they had on the roster that were, former four-star recruits. And look at Skowronek this year. I mean, obviously Lindsey and Austin, you can't really predict that they were just going to go down and not really be effective. But at the same time, it's a proven thing for depth. Where would they be right now if McKinley transferred out as a fifth year, or if Skowronek just never transferred from Northwestern or decided to go somewhere else? They would pretty much be left with Avery Davis, who, by God, another guy that has really, turned out. And then, and then who else? I mean, I don't know who else they would have on their roster. So kudos to the staff on that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, no, the other thing I was really going to say when it came to, they get their transfers, they get these kids to stay. But then when you accumulate over a 4 or 5 year period, Notre Dame is always going to be right at that top 10. Where you get some of these like schools like North Carolina or a Tennessee, like you mentioned, where they'll sometimes get like those, 28-man classes and then they end up in the top 4 somehow. Some of these other schools that sometimes hit the top 10 and everybody's like, well, why can't Notre Dame do that? But Notre Dame's always right there. And so that's why when you look at it from a 4 or 5 year standpoint, their roster construction is so much better than than a lot of other programs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something that not a lot of people realize unless you seek it out, like the level of research you do with recruiting. That's why I like having you on, because you just know way more about the nuts and bolts of it. So let's move on. Let me ask you a question I've been asking myself about the game tomorrow, okay? What do you think is going to be a bigger factor in determining the outcome of this game? Clemson's defense being much healthier or Lawrence being back? They're both going to matter. I'm asking you which one you think is a bigger deal and why.
This is a question that's been kind of churning around in my head a lot as well, because I think, you have the Lawrence factor where he's a veteran, he's been around. He's not going to throw for as many yards as DJ likely did for, his first time around, but he's going to run. He's going to probably like that last possession that Clemson had probably wins it for him. If you go back to that first game, and then just some other, maybe random 3 and outs that Clemson had that first game, maybe go differently. So I kind of lean towards that. And I think I have to, because I've been pretty adamant that this Notre Dame offense is kind of bulletproof to an extent. Once that light flicked on for Ian Book during that Clemson game, I just don't see it turning off. So whether or not they score 25 or they score 47 again, I don't think the offense, at least from a moving the ball standpoint, is going to be much of an issue, regardless of Tyler Davis or Skowski or Mike Jones or whatever being back. So yeah, I would tend to lean towards Lawrence being able to make a few more plays that are like I think I was listening to your show with Pigskin this morning a little bit, and he kind of mentioned it won't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, but it will show up on the scoreboard. I think that was perfect analysis when it came to that, and I could see that being a big factor.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too. Everybody, when you hear Lawrence, the first thing you think about is the way he throws the ball, arm strength, accuracy, and all that. His legs worry me a lot tomorrow. We cannot get all sucked into going this way, and then he rolls out and then finds time and throws it to a guy, or can bail like Ian Book does for 15 yards, get out of bounds, doesn't even get hit. I need Notre Dame to plan for him as a runner as well in this game, because that's something Clemson really didn't do with DJ, and he had a shoulder injury, so they held back from even running whatever amount they were going to with him. So that's really something I'm looking at for tomorrow. Pigskin was telling me, he goes, John, this defense, you're not going to recognize it. It's going to be a vastly different looking defense. So I'm really interested to see, with them getting 4 or 5 pieces back, how much does that slow down Notre Dame? Does it not? I'm interested to see how Reese is going to adjust off of what Venables is adjusting to from the first game. There's a lot of interesting dynamics here in play just because this is a rematch. That's super intriguing to me. The idea that this is the second time around, who's going to adjust best and then adjust off the adjustments.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I mean, the defensive players coming back don't worry me too much. I mean, they're obviously a better defense with those guys there. That's undeniable. I mean, that's like saying Notre Dame loses 3 of their starters on defense. You get them back. They're obviously going to be better. Specifically, if one of them was your heart and soul, which I guess to a certain extent, that'd be, I guess Skalski would compare more to Drew White for Notre Dame's defense because, and then Tyler Davis would probably compare more to like a Jock or a Kyle Hamilton, just obviously at a separate position. I think he's that important to their defense to an extent. But I really, really, really do think that this Notre Dame offense can pretty much score on everyone. I haven't seen a defense, even when they've a healthy defense this year, that really scares me too much. And that honestly maybe even includes Notre Dame's defense when it comes to, if we were flip-flopping, the offense of Notre Dame playing our defense, I would have some confidence that we'd be able to score on ours as well. So yeah, no, I mean, I think it really comes down to Lawrence. I think it's probably going to be lower scoring just because traditionally, rematches tend to be lower scoring anyway. Mm-hmm. And I don't think necessarily enough credit's being given to a guy like Tommy Rees and Clark Lee to an extent. I mean, obviously Clark Lee just got the Vanderbilt job and everybody's talking about him as one of the best.
How much more credit do you want him to get? He just got an SEC job and you want him to get more credit? I mean,
even going into the first game, and obviously going into the first game is a lot different. You won that game now, so Notre Dame's coaches are going to get a little bit more credit the second time around. But and Tommy Rees probably needed to prove himself before the credit happened, obviously. But at the same time, all you hear about is Tony Elliott and Brent Venables, and they're great. I mean, they are terrific coordinators and guys that should absolutely be head coaches if they want to be head coaches. But I think the gap between those two and Clark Lee, and I'm going to say it because I think I'm already fully on the Tommy Rees bandwagon. I think he's going to be a terrific coach. I wouldn't be surprised if he's an offensive guy in the NFL someday, maybe even soon. I was telling a friend this the other day. If Pat Fitzgerald somehow got the Bears gig, I wouldn't be surprised if one of his calls was Tommy Rees. He has a connection with him, and I don't know if Tommy Rees has the pedigree or this anointing that Joe Brady got because of the LSU offense last year. But man, I don't think that there's a huge gap between those two from just an overall understanding of the game and coming up with things. Like, I don't care how old you are. You can be legit at your job at 27, 28. I know you're going to hate this comparison, but I mean, Theo Epstein to me is the GOAT of executives in the baseball industry. And, he was a 28-year-old GM with the Red Sox. And I think at the time, probably people were like, oh man, that's too young, but look at him now. And I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm not saying Tommy Rees is going to be the GOAT of football coaches down the road, but if Tommy Rees is a really established and known as a terrific coordinator or coach, whatever he's doing at the time here, like 3 or 4 years down the road, it wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, he's doing a good job, and he has the pedigree with his dad. Like, the kid's been around analytical, coachy football his whole life, knows what it's like to be a quarterback. What I asked of Tommy Rees going into this year was, I just wanted to feel like the offense was structured to maximize what we have. And I think he's done a great job of that, figuring out what works, who's good at what, maximizing it. And I'm pretty damn happy with it. Every once in a while, there'll be a drive where it just doesn't work out or I don't understand what we're doing. But it's been more rare than I was expecting. So he's doing a good job. I want to mention two things that popped up in the chat. One of them was they were talking about Owusu-Koramoah being a guy that can identify Lawrence and make sure he's not going to roll out and run on you. The issue with that is somebody still has to do that for Travis Etienne too. That's like the first go around, you could tell him to just worry about Etienne. I'm worried about that back end contain against Lawrence. So how would you handle that? Because Notre Dame's got to do a great job against the run again tomorrow to have a chance. You can't just forget about that part. How would you break up those responsibilities to contain both them guys?
Well, I'll be honest. Like I said, I listened to your show a little bit earlier this morning, and I thought that Hamilton shadowed ETN the first go around more so than Owusu-Koramoah did. So I think that can be similar. Linebackers traditionally are going to shadow the quarterback more anyway. So I think you can pretty much pencil in Owusu-Koramoah as the guy that needs to spy Lawrence, at least from a running standpoint. But I also think you got to give some credit to the Notre Dame defensive line. I mean, kind of like how Book has really stepped up his game since then. I've seen some plays out of Adi Ogundeji where I'm like, man, I knew this guy was talented. I knew he was going to play in the NFL and he was going to be a really good senior player or fifth-year senior for Notre Dame. I didn't know he was that athletically gifted. I mean, what was I think it was against North Carolina where he tracked down the running back in the backfield when he looked like he had, if he would have got away from him, it was a 50-yard run. And he got him for like negative yards. You're like, how the hell did he catch up to him? So, I mean, I think you can use a guy like Adi to kind of set the edge. You can use Dalen Hayes to set the edge a little bit. Drew White is a terrific he's not necessarily the most athletically gifted. I mean, he's not Joe Schmidt out there. And I know our boy Stylites going to hate that, but
pre-injury Joe Schmidt. Not running in cement Joe Schmidt.
I like Joe Schmidt. He was a good D1 football player.
Pre-injury is fine.
Right.
But that last year, go out back behind the barn and put him down. It's over.
Right.
It was driving me crazy.
But to me, Drew White is significantly more gifted than Joe Schmidt, even pre-injury. I mean, I'm not saying he's better necessarily, but just from you can have him spy a little bit, Lawrence. I think, especially from a blitzing standpoint, I think Drew White times up his blitzes almost better than any linebacker I've seen, and that includes Owusu-Koramoah. And then the other guys who aren't necessarily as they're not veterans. They don't, they might get beat a few times if you do something right. But Leofau, Simon, Kaiser, those guys are terrific athletes in their own right, and they're going to be fresh because they're just going to rotate the entire game. So that accumulation of guys that I brought up really, like, I'm not too worried about Lawrence's running in the sense that if Notre Dame sells out to stop Etienne and Lawrence from running and they have to throw the ball like they did last game, I think it's I think they'll have a pretty good day stopping the run.
And here's the other thing too. What percentage of our lifetimes, I'm older than you, what percentage of our lifetimes have we bitched about Notre Dame not having good enough defensive line play? And if they do have it's there, but there's no depth if somebody gets hurt or whatever. Seems like they're changing that narrative. You got to be pretty damn happy about what they've been doing defensive line-wise. it's depth. It isn't just the starting guys. It's the fact that they can rotate guys in and still get quality play. Are you as impressed as I am recently with that?
And that goes back to Elston. I mean, that guy, like he's the epitome of bringing in players where, not all of them are necessarily the most highly regarded in terms of recruiting rankings, but almost all of his players turn out to be at least quality at some point. So, even a guy like Justin Adamiola, every time he steps on the field, he does something good. And he was a lot of people thought that he pretty much got into Notre Dame because of his brother. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think Notre Dame really liked him, but those were definitely some talks, at least during his recruiting. He was more of like your traditional 3-star guy. And he's, to me, at least from the role that they've given him, has been terrific. Isaiah Foskey was a 4-star guy, but, obviously in year 2, really, really good. So, they have so much depth that, I think even last year they were talking about how defensive tackle might be a sort of an issue when it comes to depth, because they, outside of, MTA and Heinisch, they had Lacey, who was a true freshman that was going to be, kind of backing them up. And then Jason Adamiola. And then behind that, they didn't really have much because it was a bunch of freshmen. Mm-hmm. Ended up working out okay because Lacey and Adamiola turned out to be terrific players, and they didn't get hurt. And now you have guys like Howard Cross that are playing. You got Riley Mills, who's a freshman, who's in a better spot than Lacey was in terms of being able to get, a little bit less playing time and be maybe even more effective in his role because of that. So now they go like 6 or 7 deep at defensive tackle specifically, and it's just awesome. And I see the comments rolling in. It's hilarious too.
I know.
Stylized boys. I don't know if he's ever told you a story on Joe Schmidt, but that's for another day.
You know what, man? And the funny thing is, you and I are used to his shtick, but the people that aren't, that's where they're like, dude, who is this guy? It's pretty kid. Funny. All right. So let me ask you this. What do you think of Ohio State's playoff situation? What do you think of where it is? How do you think it should be looked at?
I'm of the opinion you put the best 4 teams in. If you think that's the top 4, you put them in. At the same time, I think that this is awesome for Notre Dame when it comes to in the coming years. When all this bullshit talk of 13th data point and Notre Dame doesn't play a conference schedule, even though half the time they beat the teams that the other teams beat in the conference championship games. They don't play Citadel, or Sisters of the Poor, or whoever, on a yearly basis. So, no, I think that's great for Notre Dame moving forward. This is something that Kelly and whoever wants to talk about. I know Kelly was pretty fiery today in his press conference. I wouldn't be surprised if he does this down the road either. But he, just for an example, next year Notre Dame goes 12-0, and there's a couple other teams that are, the traditional guys, Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and maybe another team's in there with 1 loss but lost to Alabama or something like that in the SEC championship game. Notre Dame's going to be able to sit there and be like, look, you put Ohio State in with 6 wins, last year, COVID or not, you can't just flip your script when you want to and pick and choose what year is allowed to be different. So, and not only that, but man, we're talking about 1 game versus possibly like 5 or 6 game difference. And Notre Dame might, have 1 loss, but I think Pigskin said it today. If Clemson didn't play 7 games this year or whatever, they'd be undefeated. And they wouldn't be worrying about having to beat Notre Dame tomorrow, because I think he's pretty correct on what his analysis was. If Clemson loses tomorrow, they're probably out just because they lost to a playoff team twice. So it's like, what more do you want? Ohio State hasn't had the chance to lose to a playoff team once, let alone twice. So if you let them in at 5-0, 6-0, I'm fine with it. But then you got to have a consistency moving forward.
But see, that's my issue. I don't trust the committee to maintain philosophical consistency, not even year to year, week to week.
I think
because to me, if you made this president with Ohio State, I can live with it because I think talent-wise, they're probably top 4. But like you said, that ends the 13-12 argument. If you're cool with 5 less, you got to be cool with 1 less to maintain consistency. Also, an extension of that is, look what they did with Florida. If you're going to drop them 1 spot for that, then there's Notre Dame could go out there and get the shit kicked out of them, and they should still be in. Now, you might have to play Alabama at that point.
Right.
But if they're going to be philosophically consistent, Notre Dame's in no matter what. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and I tweeted this after the new, when Florida, I think, dropped 1 or 2 spots after their loss to LSU. Notre Dame should absolutely be in based on the criteria that they're showing from last week. What I don't trust is that next week the same criteria is going to be.
Exactly. That's the problem I have with all of this is I almost feel like it's more exaggerated this year because of COVID, which is nobody's fault. And it's not the committee's fault. They're not dealing with equal games. I get that. But the issue I'm starting to find is I feel like each team now has their own little circumstances that just apply to them, the positives, the negatives, whatever. But I feel like everybody has their own so differently that there's no way for us to match them all up against anything. And you just end up with random Iowa State. Explain Iowa State to me. 2 losses, one of them by 17 points to Louisiana. How were they up there? How?
I would laugh a lot if Notre Dame beats Clemson, gets the 1 spot somehow, and then Iowa State sneaks in, and then for the second year in a row, they're playing Iowa State for a bowl game just to do the same thing they did to them last year. Pretty much. I know year to year is different. Year to year is so much different. I'm not that guy that's going to be like, oh, well, Notre Dame beat them in January of this same year. So, like, that means they don't deserve to be in because each team and whatever is different. But that Iowa State team is actually very similar to last year's team. They didn't lose a lot of guys. I don't think they're much better than last year's team. So if they have to play them again, I would, God forbid they lose, and we're talking about something different, and we're eating a bunch of crow. But I would relish that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So some of that I just don't understand. And something else that got brought up today with Kelly, and people in the chat were asking what we think about it, is his comment about if families can't be there and all that kind of stuff. What do you think about it? Here's what I think about it. Of course they're going to play. He's just making a point. Am I wrong? Like, I seen things on Sports Center talking about this. So this isn't a nothing to me. It's him making a point that he would like the families to see the kids play. They're going to play no matter what. He's just posturing, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to this.
I love his comments overall. At the same time, the first thing I thought of when he mentioned those comments, or when he said those comments, I'm like, man, Notre Dame better win tomorrow, because he's not going to get the committee in his good graces with those comments, because he was pretty fiery about it. But at the same time, I mean, they lose tomorrow and they don't make it, then I think most people are probably going to sit there and say it was a sham to begin with.
If we lose tomorrow and don't make it, this channel may not exist, because I'm going to probably wig out to the point where something bad happens. There's no way, man. Well, by the criteria they're going by, there's no logical way we could be left out. And I'll even go a step further. I think the deal we should make is, as good as we perceive Ohio State to be talent-wise, if we're giving you a 5-week benefit of the doubt, guess what? You're number 4.
No matter what.
Number 4. We'll let you in, but your punishment for having 5 less bodies of work is play Alabama, and then we'll see. So even if Notre Dame loses.
Right. I've gone back and forth on if I want to, Mike Singer's in the chat.
Oh, Jesus.
I've gone back and forth on whether or not Clemson playing Notre Dame in that first round would be something the committee would do or not. Part of me wants to say they wouldn't, but then the flip side of that,
there's a flip side argument to it.
Right. Well, the flip side is you want one of those teams in the championship game. That's my opinion. They play each other twice. Let's just say it was two really close games. And obviously the first game we know went to double overtime, whatever. So let's just say the second game's the same thing. Clemson wins, right? Why wouldn't you want one of those teams to play probably Alabama in the national championship game? But at the same time, I think you get these fans of Notre Dame and Clemson. They're like, God damn it, why do we got to play this team right, back to back to back, essentially? And I don't know. I'd rather play Clemson again than Alabama, probably, but I don't know.
Yeah, but that is one thing I've been playing with in my mind is, what is the committee's appetite for Notre Dame, Clemson 3 times?
Right.
I could see reasons to not do it, but let's say tomorrow is a really good game and Clemson wins it this time. Is there really that many people that don't want to see the rubber match of that the third time? I think the fact that it's so soon might be the issue.
The other argument, I think, is there's a lot of people that will think that those teams deserve to maybe play each other for the championship because maybe they're just the two best teams, or at least from who they've played, who they've beaten, who they've lost to. Mm-hmm. They deserve. I don't think anybody's arguing that Clemson and Notre Dame are like significantly better than Alabama, regardless of what happens tomorrow. And that includes a Notre Dame victory, like I said. Like if Notre Dame wins, I'm not even convinced they'll be the number 1 team. But
wait a second. I don't think
they would. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if, and again, you could argue that based on whatever. It's never going to happen. Even if Notre Dame won by 3 scores against Clemson, if Alabama wins, we're number 2. Right.
I agree. I
don't see any way to jump that
or not. I think it's true. But yeah, no, that's the other argument there. It's like, okay, should those teams play each other for the chance to play Alabama? And that should be the championship, guarantee one of those teams gets in? Or should it be Notre Dame or Clemson, whoever, loses or wins or whatever, gets the 4 seed, plays Alabama, and the other team gets Ohio State or whoever else is in. But then you might guarantee yourself the 2 best teams not being in the championship. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I don't know what to think about tomorrow. I do think it's going to be a lower scoring game overall. I mean, I know we had a couple overtimes, but I still think it might be a lower scoring game. It's unique because we're playing the same team, but they're getting all these guys back. I almost feel like I'm not comfortable feeling like it's the same team. But then again, I might be overblowing those guys coming back. What I'd like more than anything else is to make Lawrence look human. Make him look like a regular guy for one freaking afternoon. Just make him look like a regular guy. Make him look like a human. Hit him every chance you get.
Hey, if it's anything like the first game, maybe he'll be on the sideline like ETN saying that Notre Dame's hitting too hard. I don't know if you ever saw.
I did. I really liked hearing that quote. I don't know, man. I'm just all the opportunity. The path is so divergent here. It's so. Think about it, Nathan. If you lose,
Mike's firing you up.
Mike, don't do that. Nobody needs that. Nobody needs that.
Oh, man.
But think about the 2 divergent paths, Nathan. Notre Dame wins. It's the ultimate troll job of all time. Also, you have all the momentum going in the playoff, and you're going to have a seed where you could avoid Alabama. Okay? That's one angle. The other angle is you lose to Clemson, then you got to play Alabama, and bad things might happen then, and then your season fizzles out into the January night. Those are 2 really opposite trajectories to end the season.
Well, here's the thing. If they lose to Clemson, regardless of the score, and then go out and lose to Alabama, the same old narrative will continue because everybody's just going to bring up the fact that they beat Clemson, without Trevor Lawrence specifically, because he is the big name. And then, you're going to get this, Notre Dame still doesn't belong. And that's, I guess as a fan, that's what worries me. As an analyst of sorts, I don't really read into that kind of stuff too much. But you hate to see it on Twitter all the time, and it gets and it gets annoying. But so that I think if they can beat Clemson the second time around, and regardless of how they lose or if they lose to Alabama, whether that be in the championship game or the first game of the college football playoff, I think they would garner some respect because they beat Clemson with Lawrence. They beat Clemson with the healthy defense. They beat Clemson without their starting center, which I think is not being talked about enough, at least for Notre Dame's offensive line cohesion. And not to mention Josh Lugg and Zeke Correll. I think it's going to end up being Josh Lugg that's there, but they're both banged up playing as well. So, yeah, it's going to be one of those things for sure where they need to they still almost have to put up or shut up to a certain extent.
You know what, man? I've gotten so used to that. It's Notre Dame's never going to win that battle. Even if they beat Clemson, win a playoff game, beat Alabama, win the championship, people are just going to say, this is COVID year, it doesn't count. It's always going to be something. The goalpost is always moving on Notre Dame, always. But it is the way it is. All right, we're almost an hour and a half into this. Anything else you want to cover? I feel bad keeping you all night.
Oh, no, you're good, man. I don't have nothing better to do with this. I think I told you I'm kind of in quarantine right now anyway for the last couple of days. So
yeah.
No, man, hope they win. I'll be honest, I'm not predicting a win. I know I didn't predict a win last time, so I'm going to kind of stick with that just from that regard too. A little superstitious. So I think going into the first game, I predicted Clemson was going to win like something around like 24-18, 24-17. It was going to be one of those games similar to the Georgia games of the last couple of years where Notre Dame feels like they have a chance at the end, but when you're really watching it, you're like, they're probably not going to go down and score and get that last drive. With the way the game played out the first time, I was a little bit more confident the offense could do it because they had proven it multiple times throughout the game. And actually, that's one more quick thing, if you don't mind, I want to mention. Even with Lawrence back, with defense back, et cetera, I don't think enough talk is out there about the fact that Notre Dame really blew chances to win that game by a pretty large margin. And not necessarily I'm not talking 21, 28 points where it looks like they just completely dominated the game. But Michael Mayer, false start. Michael Mayer drop touchdown. Ian Book fumble, at the 5-yard line. That was 21 points essentially that turned into 6.
Yep.
That's a lot. That's a lot of points in a football game. Yep. And I'm not saying that every time they get in the red zone, they're going to score a touchdown, but a fumble is a huge deal, especially if you don't recover it, obviously. And then not getting one of those to where you turn 6 points into at least 10 points, that's a huge deal. And so, yeah, I would that's kind of what gives me some confidence, like I mentioned earlier, about Notre Dame being able to put up some points. I don't think that they're going to have 3 big miscues in the red zone like they did the first time.
Yeah, it's going into the first Clemson game, I believed we had to play damn near close to perfectly efficient to win this game. I ended up coming out of it actually feeling a little relieved because I feel like there's still meat left on the bone. Notre Dame has not played a full, complete, really good game yet. And they've done some great things. They still have a gem somewhere. When are you going to show up and pitch your gem where everything just goes right and you're hitting on all cylinders? I'm waiting for it. They did well against Clemson, but that wasn't their best ball game. Notre Dame's got more in the tank. Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Their best ball game was against South Florida. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I don't know what their best ball game was this year. I think you can make an argument almost for every game. They had a couple miscues here and there, whether they were fumbles, false starts, whatever.
Yeah, but I'm not used to getting you could get away with those when you're playing these other teams, clean it up and you're fine. I never thought we'd be able to get away with it against Clemson and still win, and we did. So that gives me, I'm encouraged about that. We have not played our best game yet. There's still at least one of them in the tank somewhere. Right. Tomorrow would be a hell of a time to pull it out.
Right. If we want to do some picks real quick, I know some people have been mentioning that in the chat. Like I said, I'm probably not going to pick a Notre Dame victory. That has a lot to do with just playing the team for the second time, not being in South Bend. Clemson having maybe a little bit more to play for, even if it doesn't necessarily seem that way. So I'm going to go like Clemson 30, Notre Dame 27. I think it's going to be close. I think Notre Dame's going to cover the spread unless it's, Clemson, unless it's similar to like the North Carolina game where Clemson just like puts up 7, with a minute left, and Notre Dame, and that puts them down like 14 or something like that. That's really the only way I've seen this. I see this being looking like a blowout if you didn't watch. But overall, I think it's going to be a close game throughout, and Notre Dame's going to have to probably get off to another good start because I don't think they can win if they're chasing.
Yep. If I had to pick it with my money, and I never gamble on Notre Dame because I'm too close to it, so I never do, I would pick a close game. Lawrence makes one play that makes the difference, and they win it if I had to pick it. However, I do see multiple angles for Notre Dame to come out on top again, and one of those factors is getting off to an early start. You do not want to chase ever. You especially don't want to chase Trevor Lawrence. And that is not Notre Dame's recipe. That's not what they're best at doing.
Right.
Getting off to an early start is huge. That Kyron Williams run in the first game, that changed the whole tone instantly. And it's like right away, everybody's going, okay, this is going to be something tonight, right away. So making sure we're the ones doing that and not them is a big damn deal.
Absolutely, for sure.
Oh, boy. All right. An hour and a half of your time. I appreciate that. I don't know what you're going to do. If people are in the chat, I will stay in this chat and just mess around. I'm fine doing it.
If we want to answer some questions, I tried to get some people to come on to get some questions out there. Anybody? I know we had a gentleman mention the Estime and Kari G. I talked about those a little bit. G, actually, you know what? One thing I could do, and I kind of told you I was going to do this if we want. I mean, I already have my, 1 through 27 essentially for Notre Dame's commits. I don't necessarily have to go through all of them, but I've mentioned a few times now in the chat that I think the top 10 or so really, really compare with with the top teams in the country. So just to give you a quick rundown of who I have in my top 10, I think Tyler Buckner is still number 1. I'm as high on him as anybody. I fully admit that. I think there's a lot of people that question he really had the 1 year. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you finish that, this question's been asked by multiple people. How much more room is left in this class? Because we've already extended out more than what we've been going. How much more room is there? We didn't actually talk about that. Is there still a couple more guys in play? How much more wiggle room do we got?
I wouldn't be surprised if they landed another guy. Who that guy is at the moment, I don't really know. I've heard there's some things going on behind the scenes. I mean, obviously Sierra Wright is still out there.
The movie star.
Yeah, I don't think he's coming. I'll be honest. I think if he wasn't the movie star that you mentioned, I think he would be at Notre Dame. I think he really, really likes the school to a certain extent, at least from a football standpoint, would probably choose Notre Dame. But he's just one of those kids where the other side of his life is equally as important, and I can't fault him for that. Going to a school like USC or UCLA, and I think it's going to end up being USC when it's all said and done, that's going to set him up for that side of his life. And you know what? I know we all hate USC in this chat, but USC is a damn good football program, that they could easily, figure it out. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're, a playoff team, for years to come. So, I mean, we know that they recruit at a high level and they bring in the top talent, from California yearly. So I think he's going to end up at USC. But yeah, no, I mean, it's there. I think there's some other guys that they at least might be talking to. I haven't heard anybody specifically. I mean, I know Ron Pallas came kind of out of nowhere. So that could, something like that could happen. I mean, even Kari G to a certain extent came out of nowhere.
I feel like that one just popped up.
Right. Exactly.
All right, here's what we're going to do now. Nathan's going to talk while John goes and takes a leak. I'll be right back. An hour and a half. I chugged a coffee before we came on. Talk to the people, and I'll be back in a minute.
I was chugging beers before. I don't know what you're doing.
I was going to go grab one, yeah. All right, you talk to the people. I'll be back.
All right. Well, first off, anybody has any questions recruiting-wise or anything like that, definitely throw some in here. We won't get into too much detail until John gets back. I saw someone mention a QB transfer. All the Brendan Clark stuff, that's still kind of up in the air right now. If he turns out to if that injury turns out to be pretty significant, then he's definitely a guy that he's definitely a guy that you might have to replace to a certain extent. I don't think all due respect to Pallas coming in as another guy that Kelly mentioned, I don't think that they're gonna I don't think he's the answer necessarily, at least from next year's standpoint, to be a guy. So, I mean, there's some guys in the portal. Charlie Brewer from Baylor is a name that I think he's a pretty talented player. Let me preface this by saying I haven't heard anything specifically on any of these guys. But Brewer would be a guy I would at least look into if you want to bring in a guy for next year to start. Hendon Hooker over from Virginia Tech, I think, would mesh well in this offense. I mean, he's very similar to Book in the sense that he can run. Maybe Book's a little bit better thrower and just kind of a natural quarterback, but I could see Tommy Rees doing a lot of good things with a guy like Hendon Hooker. Grant Gunnell, who transferred from Arizona, not a necessarily prototypical guy that, is someone that's going to come to Notre Dame and succeed at 6'5", 230. That's not really what they're looking for. He's not a huge runner, though. I think he does have some athleticism to him. He'd be a guy that'd be really intriguing, but he has a couple years of eligibility left, and I don't know if they want to put a guy like Buckner in that kind of predicament to an extent, because I do think the staff's a lot higher on Buckner than pretty much anybody. Definitely from that, you got to look at it. I think they're pretty comfortable with Pine and Buckner battling it out if Clark can't go, to be completely honest, but I wouldn't be surprised if they look at some QBs. I know a gentleman mentioned Estime and Kari G. I did speak at length about those guys earlier on in the chat. G's in my top 10 for this class. I just think he's a really talented player that has a lot of positional versatility. Can play safety, can play a linebacker, honestly could probably play corner early on until he grows. And then Estime is just a guy that, you look at what Wisconsin brings in on a yearly basis at running back. And then if you want to go a step further and just look at what the SEC teams do in terms of, like Georgia and Alabama specifically, those guys always bring in big backs that can, that are also tremendous athletically. And I think Estime is kind of in the mold of those type of players. So really excited to see him. He's already pretty yoked up, as a lot of you know. So if he's someone that can, at least from a speed standpoint, if he, when he gets into a Bayless weight room, size and speed, I mean, he's gonna flourish. So Estime is definitely a guy that has a chance to be a really good running back and maybe even be a significant impact guy next year. Welcome back, John.
Thanks for having me on my own show.
Talked a little QB.
Nice to be with you.
Right.
We talked what?
Talked a little QB transfer just in case, Clark's injury is a little iffy. And then I answered the one gentleman's question about Estime and G. So.
Oh, I'm going to answer a question now. Johnny Tran asked me if I color my beard. No, but
I was thinking about that today, actually.
I don't color it, but I did two things. One is I did trim it a little bit. And number two, I changed the lighting in this studio so things show up a little different. I'm trying different things with the lighting. So that's what it is. But no, I don't color my beard. Your beard is weird.
Are you a redhead?
Yeah.
Oh,
yep. It was never carrot top like orange red, but it was like Auburn red. And now after so many decades in Notre Dame, it's half gray.
There you go.
And falling out, but it used to be red. Yes, I did trim it with Manscaped, the same one I use for that, John. Yeah, it works perfect. Dude, I honestly miss anybody who listened last year around between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I did all those Manscaped ad reads because I was with that other group.
Uh-huh.
And I made up all my own rhymes, don't torture your toboggan, get the Manscaped, all that kind of stuff. And I did all that, sent in the metrics. I never got a dime of what I was going to get out of that. They dropped off. I never got $1 damn for all those rhymes I made up. I didn't get any
Manscaped products.
What?
Did you get any product?
No, they were supposed to send me a little kit as a sample, not to try live, but a sample to try. I never got a sample, and I never got a nickel.
I see a few other questions. One guy goes, with our receivers back, how much does that improve our vertical game versus the first game? I really hope that there's some sort of niche in there for Lindsey. That would be so awesome if, early on he catches a 70-yard bomb for a touchdown. Because I could, I know most people don't want to go there because, it's kind of like what you were saying. I mean, Notre Dame's kind of who they are at this point. But there are some things to this offense that I think, and I wouldn't be surprised, and I've already kind of talked about how much I respect Tommy Rees already. I think there's some things that they could do, whether that be a trick play with Avery Davis throwing the ball or something that they've been working on all year, or holding back Lindsey the last couple weeks to kind of give Clemson the idea that he's not really ready to go. I hope there's something that they can do because I think they're going to need it, whether it be this game or in the playoff. They're going to need something. And when I say trick play, I don't mean a trick play where it's like, oh, that will never work again. I mean, Avery Davis can throw the ball. So if you do something where you put the ball in his hands or even fake it where, you do the sweeps and then he just throws one, even if it's for like a 5-yard dump, at least it gives people the idea that something like that could happen.
Yeah, and you know what else, too? I think Avery Davis deserves more credit for all he's kind of been through as well. With the position changes and all that stuff, he's a kid who could have said, you know what, I don't need this. I'm going to go somewhere else. He stuck with it, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's this was a couple weeks ago now, but when there was all this talk about Jurkovec, it was during the Boston College game. I don't mind a kid transferring. I don't have any ill will towards Jurkovec. I hope he has success. I hope he finds success in the NFL and whatever he does in life. That game was so annoying to listen to because they act like no kids ever transferred in their life and played the team that they transferred. Like it happens. The kid was a talented high school recruit. He's obviously a talented quarterback that has some growing to do, and that showed against Notre Dame. Why aren't we talking up kids like Avery Davis, who came in as a damn quarterback, was obviously beat out, moved to corner, moved to running back, moved to wide receiver, and now he is a prominent player for Notre Dame. He's a guy that if he makes a play for you, and that showed against a team like Clemson, you're not surprised. And same with McKinley, a kid that got into trouble early on at Notre Dame, probably could have got kicked out. Stuck with it, was a good student from everything I've heard. So at least from a classroom standpoint and stuff like that, he was fine. And that probably had a lot to do with Notre Dame keeping him enrolled. But he could have easily transferred this year, gone to another school, whether that be another Power 5 or whatever, and produced, stuck with it, was still probably number 2 or number 3 on the depth chart coming into the season, and has worked out tremendously for them. So, I mean, I think those kids need a lot more credit than, these kids that – and like I said, with the way college football is, I don't care if a kid transfers out. It doesn't bother me. I don't think every situation is their own. But if you're going to talk up the transfers, you got to talk up the kids that stay too.
Yeah, but that doesn't make the news the way it does Notre Dame, Boston College, all their history, the quarterbacks. I understand it because that was the angle for the TV that day. I get it. Here's this came up in the chat. Why, with all this speed and talent we have now, why is a slow walk-on catching punts? Why? Why? Tell me freaking why.
Well, first, a lot of it is the guy who was originally returning punts got hurt and had the fumble, and I think that Kelly lost a little bit of faith. Lawrence Keys, obviously, is who I'm talking about. He's another guy that can make an impact in this game or in the playoff if he can get rolling. But no, I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think Kelly, to a certain extent, wants special teams to just be there versus messing up or doing amazing things. I think he just wants it to be steady. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I think that's what it is.
There's 3 phases you can use as an advantage. Use all 3. Yeah. Notre Dame's got talent. I don't like seeing them just give up yardage. Like, to me, it's just yardage that could be gained that isn't being gained. And I don't think Notre Dame can't be where they're at right now and have worries. They can't put one of these guys back there and they're going to drop a punt. Give me a break.
Right.
I don't know.
I think the Chris Fink stuff by fans was a little overblown. I thought he was a fine punt returner. He didn't necessarily have the, like the juice, I guess, that you wanted, but I thought he was actually pretty good and had a lot of good returns during his time. But no,
I just want our fastest guys to do stuff fast guys are good at. I'm not asking for too much.
I agree. And I think that's kind of why I backed up. I wouldn't be surprised next year if, Lorenzo Styles is your number 1 punt returner. And
let me ask this, and maybe there's something to this. I don't know. Why would a guy be back there to return kickoffs, but not punts? Is it that big of a difference the way the ball's spinning?
I do think
I don't get that.
I don't even know if it's necessarily the difference.
I don't get it.
I don't think it's the difference in necessarily catching the ball, like from a, hey, if no one's coming at you, you're catching the ball. I do think, we saw it with Salerno when he got knocked on his ass a couple weeks ago, and obviously super illegal and stuff like that. So you give the kid a lot of credit, and whether he fumbled or not, it wouldn't have been a big deal in that sense because they would have got the ball back. I do think that almost getting hit at times if you don't call for a fair catch, or even just the guys being around you when you catch the ball, is such a huge difference. I personally have not done kick returns or punt returns in my life, so I can't really attest to it. But that just seems like the most logical reason for why guys wouldn't necessarily be comfortable doing one, but possibly the other.
I guess. I mean, fine. And here's the other thing. While we're on special teams, Jonathan Doerr's field goals lately have been bad. Like not like, hey, I barely missed, like not even hit solid.
Right.
You and I are both golfers. I always say it lately. It's been like teeing off on number 1 when you're hungover at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday, you're half asleep and it's just,
right.
Just a total miss hit.
There's golf shots that are bad and there's golf shots that are good that end up bad.
But he's not even kicked. The ones he's missing are not close and they're not solidly struck. And that needs to just magically all go away tomorrow, because I will not be able to handle us being in a game with Clemson we could win and having a field goal lose it for us. I'm going to have a stroke. I'm going to have a stroke.
Yeah, the 50-yard one doesn't bother me as much, even though I think he did hit it poorly. Was it the one he shanked from 32 out a few weeks ago? That one's concerning, obviously. I will say, though, with Dorr, I don't think a lot phases him. You can see early on in his career, he had a lot of those bad kickoffs, and he kind of just kept churning and doing. And even going into last year, I think there was a lot of questions about him as a kicker, and he pretty much shut those down. It wouldn't surprise me if he decided to go 4 for 4 tomorrow. I hope he doesn't go 4 for 4. I hope he goes 6 for 6 on on PATs, and that's it.
You know what else crossed my mind about this? It crossed my mind. I don't think it's bad enough to where it's something Kelly's going to be nervous to run him out there and kick it.
Right.
But it changes the way you run your offensive series. If in your mind you're going, when we get to 3rd and 4th down, I got 2 to play with here. That changes things. But I have a feeling Kelly's going to run him out there and give him every chance. And I'm not saying not to. I'm just saying I've noticed missing is missing, but when you're hitting it and missing it, that's different to me. So hopefully that's just worked itself out. Yeah, or we don't need it to win or something. I don't know.
Maybe going home for him will help. He's from the North Carolina area, so maybe that will give him a little energy to kick well tomorrow. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all these things are anxieties I have, and they never go away. You know how I am. I'm always going to be worried about something, no matter what. That's why I have no hair left.
I feel it. I don't have a lot of hair left, but I think you know me. And I bring this up all the time when I'm on Twitter or when I'm talking to someone else. It's not necessarily you. I always say I don't know what it is about me personally. I just don't get and my wife would probably disagree with this. She's sitting in the room, so she'll probably chime in. You might hear her say something, but when it comes to my sports or my team specifically, I feel like I'm very even keeled during the game. I don't go too high, go too low. The reason I say she'll disagree, she sees me kind of moving my feet a lot and kind of getting antsy and different things like that. But I think from my takes on Twitter and different things like that, you know that I'm very like, hey, just calm down. The team's going to be fine, especially when they're playing, Syracuse like last week or a couple weeks ago. I wasn't worried about that game in the slightest. And, there might have been, some fans that were, but I don't know. It's just not the way I'm wired, I guess.
Yeah, me neither. I'm real even keel. I like to just chill out, see how things go, just lay low. I react later.
I think it honestly.
You know what else, Nathan? People want me to go live after the game tomorrow, and I don't know whether that's a good idea or not. Even if we win, I don't know if it would be a good idea because I might say some things that I don't want everybody to hear.
If they lose, I don't know if you should invite me on. I'll say that, but if they win, certainly invite me on. I'll talk with you for a little bit.
The only problem with that isn't the Florida-Alabama on right after us? I don't want to miss all that because I'm doing this,
Right.
I need one of those setups where I could have the TV like behind me so I could keep tabs on that while doing this. All these people that I recognize also from Twitter are like, yeah, John, you're always even keel. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't recognized too many people. I know Revelis on Twitter a little bit. Obviously, Style doesn't go by his real name.
John Tran, he's followed me for a long time. Really good dude. I don't
know how many of these people follow me. I'm sure some of them do through you, but yeah. No.
But Nathan, the other thing too is that's why I like doing some of this stuff with you, because I feel like it's a good balance because I'm always so high or low with whatever's going on. You kind of balance me out. So you're a good stable influence on me.
Right. Do you want to what was it? Nathan, where do you watch in Vegas? I tried High Scores, Angry Wives. Not much energy there, though. I'll be honest. I don't know if you see that comment yet, John. I typically, for people who know me well enough, I watch with my dad for the most part. I try to. He's, diehard Notre Dame in his 70s, not in the best of health. That's sports is really what we bond over the most. And Notre Dame has always been something that we bond over maybe more so than some of our other sports that we watch together. So, and especially with COVID and different things like that, he can't go out in public. So I'm usually at his house watching the game. I'm hoping tomorrow I'll be able to be there. Like I said, I'm in quarantine right now. I'm hoping to get that lifted by tomorrow morning. Yeah, no, that's where I watch. I mean, to answer his question a little bit further, when I watch NFL, it's definitely at least previously. But prior to COVID, I would go to some local bars. Twin Peaks was one that I would go to with a lot of my good buddies and different things like that. But
Nathan, I can't watch Notre Dame in public. Like it won't. It's dude. Like it's even being at games is very hard for me because I'm stuck in one spot. I can't pace around. I can't say what I normally say. But I can't watch Notre Dame games in public. It's just a bad idea for everybody involved. I can't watch with mixed company. Like I need my own little thing. Like
you can't watch it with even Notre Dame fans?
What do you mean Notre Dame fans? You mean like other regular people?
If I was in Chicago, would I be able to come over to your house and watch with you?
Yes, but we're not going to a bar, but I could be just like with you in my house, but I'm not going to a bar. I can't do it.
How do you watch when you actually go to games?
What?
Do you turn around when you're live at Notre Dame? Do you just turn around and pretend that you're watching?
Dude, I just I just sit there and move my legs the whole game. I'm just like, I just can't. I'm a pacer. Like when I'm watching a Notre Dame game, I cannot sit. I just pace around in between plays. I'm walking around. I can't sit still. It causes me anxiety. I've watched one Notre Dame game in a bar in my life, and it was a bar in South Bend when Notre Dame was at Michigan in 2011, that first night game at the Big House, the Gary Gray game. And I was at a wedding. I was at a wedding at Notre Dame, and then they didn't have the game on at the reception, so I left and went down the street to some bar, and they didn't even want to put the Notre Dame game on in South Bend at the bar. I just can't handle it. Right. I can't do it. So
I've been spurned too many times watching with friends. I remember 2012. So just to kind of age myself, probably in a good way to most people that are here, but I graduated high school in 2011. So 2012 was the Notre Dame championship game. I had just graduated, essentially, because it was or whatever. And I think it was actually on my birthday. I had a bunch of friends over to watch with my dad, of course, at the time, and not a good way to watch the Alabama Notre Dame championship not only on your birthday, which sucks, but also with friends that don't have the passion that I do for Notre Dame.
Do you want to know what I did for that 2012 title game? I was in my college roommate's wedding in Mexico. Okay. So you got to schedule that out like a year in advance because it was this getaway trip to Mexico. I looked at the dates and I said to myself, yeah, the title game overlaps with this, but what are the odds it's going to matter to us? So we book it all. Sure enough, we end up in the title game. I end up paying like $600 to switch my flight to leave from Mexico to come back to Midway to Chicago. And I did all that. The flight landed. I got home right before the game started, and I wish I was still in Mexico.
There you go.
That's how it went for me.
The one story I have that is good for me when it comes to watching Notre Dame with people. The 20, I forgot what year it was. It was what year did Notre Dame blow out Michigan? Like it was that they should have won
was that 14? I think it was 14 maybe.
Yeah, whatever year it was. We have some really close family friends out here in Vegas that are big Michigan fans. They're from the Michigan area. They went to I grew up with them, going to church with them and stuff like that. They're big Cub fans, so like I bonded with them from that perspective and different things like that. But we invited them over, the whole family. And like I said, their whole family is Michigan fans, and they came over, and Luckily, I'm not the type of person that is gonna like get in your face and anger you when I'm watching a game, and they're the same way. So it was still fun to watch, even from their perspective. But man, that was the best I've been able to do, at least from having like a rival friend with me or just friends watching with me in general. That was pretty fun. And then the only other one is my mom's side of the family, big Nebraska football fans, and I have nothing against Nebraska. If I had a second team, that might be it, just because I have a lot of family members that love Nebraska. But I could honestly care less in general. My uncle, whenever he comes into town, he's the biggest Nebraska fan you'll meet. He's like me and you when it comes to Notre Dame.
Does he wear one of those corn hats?
No, he's not weird like that. But
I always got a chuckle out of that big corn cob.
But he likes to give me so much crap about Notre Dame, and I always laugh because, like, obviously Nebraska is nowhere near where Notre Dame is right now. And so every time, and especially the last couple of years, which has been really nice because he's usually over when, Notre Dame's playing a weaker team or whatever. He's like, Notre Dame's probably going to lose this game, man. They're always overrated. They're going to lose. And then they end up like blowing them out or something like that.
Here's the other problem with being a Nebraska fan is there ain't anything else going on in Nebraska. So that's all you have. They have no pro sports. So you either work in the fields or hope Nebraska football's decent. What the hell else is there to do? My other story with him, when Xavier Watts, who was from Nebraska high school ranks, when I knew he was coming to Notre Dame, it was last year around like July 4th. And the only reason I remember this is we were in Ohio with some family members out there, and they're big-time Nebraska fans too, but they don't care as much as him. He was there, and I was like, hey, I know Nebraska does a pretty good job keeping their studs in state, but I just want to let you know that this really stud wide receiver is going to commit to Notre Dame today. I got word or whatever. And he was like, no, that's not going to happen. If anything, he's going to flip anyway. Like, there's no way he leaves Nebraska. He'll be shunned for life, blah, blah, blah. And then like 2 hours later, I show him a text that the kid came into Notre Dame, and he's like, yeah, I need to start believing you when you say this stuff. I'm like, hey, I'm not trying to brag, but I do get some good info these days when it comes to this type of stuff. Oh, man. What else do we got going on here? Stylites still causing issues in the chat. Jeez. Did you want me to go over the list of recruits? I mean, I know not everybody follows recruiting like myself or even you do. So, like I said, I think the top 10 is pretty much as good as everybody's top 10 out there. I can kind of run through some names and just see if anybody has questions about those guys or anything. Why don't you run through the top 10 then? That'll put us a little bit over 2 hours, and then I'm going to go eat some dinner. Why don't we do that?
Perfect. So, I kind of like what I was starting with originally, Stylites finger. I don't know if he told you about that, but sorry. Yeah, so Tyler Buckner, I'm as high on him as pretty much anybody out there. I know there's been some talk with like the camps and different things like that. A lot of people see him as kind of a polarizing recruit more so than a elite recruit. But I think he's for sure the number one kid, and I think he has to be. If Notre Dame wants to continuously compete for championships and different things like that, they're going to need a Trevor Lawrence type of quarterback eventually. And Tyler Buckner's my first guy. I mentioned him earlier. Prince Collie's number 2. I think that kid's senior film is as good as I've seen at the linebacker position for Notre Dame, and that includes guys like Jalen Smith and Teo. Just for an example, I think he's really talented, and he might not be the top 10 guy that those guys were. At least Jalen Smith, from an athletic standpoint, was just insane. I'm a little bit too young to remember like Teo's high school film per se. But I remember him being obviously like a top 5 guy and someone you had to have. I don't think necessarily, I wouldn't say Collie's necessarily in that realm. But I think if you were asking me, I think he's very borderline 5-star when it comes to just recruit. Third, Lorenzo Styles Jr. Talked about him several times a little bit today too. I think he has a really good chance to be a punt returner, kick returner for him next year starting. A lot like, I think he's more polished than Lindsey coming out of high school. But he, might not necessarily have the same level of track speed that Lindsey has, but I don't think he necessarily needs it to be a really, really good, effective downfield threat. Can also play corner. I think if he was a true corner take for Notre Dame, more people would have him as like a top 50 player. I think it's Rivals that has him as a I think Rivals has him as almost like a borderline 5-star. So I tend to agree with their rankings more when it comes to Styles. And then this is kind of where we get into the offensive line. I think Blake Fisher has the highest upside outside of Joe Alt on the offensive line.
Also, he's also on the staff because he's a great recruiter. Honestly, man, that's a weapon when you have a kid with that personality. People laugh that I've been making a big deal about the way he recruits. People kind of laugh. I'm dead ass serious. He's a guy that has all the players' ears. They all talk to each other. They're in the same social media circles. So I like that he was a conduit between the staff and the kids. The other reason I like it is he's not even there yet, and he's already kind of a leader of that group because he was rallying them all together. I love that dynamic. I think it's a really good angle to have a kid like that. I wish you could find one in every class that is the ringleader that brings it all together. I love that.
And that's obviously super underrated. I mean, in terms of his importance to the class and as a player, even maybe moving forward, like he's obviously captain material. Kids gravitate towards him. As a player, though, the reason I have him ranked 4th and not a little bit higher, I mean, he's another guy that Rivals, I think, actually has as a 5-star kid right now. I think he's a little raw. For as good as he is and as big as he is, he hasn't played the best competition. I want to see – I think he's like listed at 330. I'd like to see him cut that down and maybe build it back up a little bit in a more effective way. And again, that's not a knock on him. I mean, there's kids that come in like that all the time, and he's a really good football player. But I think it might take a few.
You know what else too? Here's something else that we need to mention. The work that Bayless and all his guys have put in, the work with the psychology stuff they've been doing, the work with the training table and nutrition and all that stuff. Those are all things where Notre Dame has no chance of being in the position they're in if all those things weren't addressed and upgraded. And to Notre Dame's credit, they've done that. And that's all behind the scenes stuff, not the guys getting the big credit. You know all their names and faces. None of what's happening right now would be possible if all those things weren't going well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. Number 5 for me is Gabriel Rubio, another really good, just dominant high school football player that, you've seen this trend with Elston the last couple of years. He seems to bring in at least one really, really good defensive tackle a year. It went Lacey to Riley Mills, now to Gabe Rubio. If he keeps bringing in at least one stud like that and then pencils in, a few other guys or sprinkles in a few other guys every year. I mean, I know Howard Cross came in with Lacey as well. Aiden Keanana came in last year with Mills. And then, you have, Jason Anye, who might move inside this year. So, but no, he keeps bringing in one dude every year on the interior. They're going to be set up for a lot. And I think Rubio won't necessarily need to play right away, but it might be hard, kind of like Riley Mills is this year. It might be hard to keep him off the field when it's all said and done. Number 6 for me is Phillip Reilly. I mentioned this, earlier on in the game as well, or early on in the game. I'm already preparing for the Clemson Notre Dame game at this point, 2 hours in, but earlier on in our live show that we have, getting him back in the fold was terrific. I don't know if he's a corner. If he was a surefire corner, I'd probably actually have him a little higher. I think he's going to end up being a safety at Notre Dame. And there's no knock on that. I mean, look at Kyle Hamilton, for example. I mean, if he ends up being a stud safety, then he's going to be a really good player. But he does have some versatility. Notre Dame fans might not like to hear this comp, but I kind of see him as like a Houston Griffith type, at least coming out. Hopefully he can end up, getting on the field a little bit quicker than Griffith did, or has so far, and be a really good player for them, especially because they're going to need some safeties with Hamilton moving on most likely after next year. 7 for me is Spindler. At least from a technical standpoint and maybe ready-made standpoint, I think Spindler is the best offensive tackle or offensive lineman in the class for Notre Dame, and that includes Blake Fisher. I wouldn't even be surprised if his name's being thrown around next year as the right guard, possibly even starting. And they can probably afford to have that happen with the guys that are going to be around him if he's that good right away. So he's definitely a guy. I mean, really, really big win over Michigan. There's the whole story about his, grandpa telling him he needed to go to Notre Dame, and he kind of he followed through with that, which is a really cool, like feel good story. But no, he's another kid. And like I said, those top 7 right there, I'm not done. I mean, I think the next 3 I'm going to name are pretty much right up there as well. In regards to like just everybody else in the country, but those top 7, I mean, Rocco Spindler is my number 7, and he's a top 100 almost consensus player. So, I mean, just looking at it from that perspective, Notre Dame is definitely bringing in talent. Number 8 for me is actually Kari G. I'm not going to talk too much about him because I mentioned him a few times already, but 6'3", 190, has a lot of versatility. I mean, even coming into Notre Dame, I think he could play corner. Probably will start out at safety, maybe move down to the rover spot or inside linebacker at the Mike linebacker spot possibly. But no, I think he's as talented as it gets. He reminds me so much of Kyle Hamilton, like junior year Kyle Hamilton, where if he had maybe a full season's worth of film, he could turn out to be a really legitimate 4 or 5-star player. Number 9 is Dion Kolze. I'm a little bit bullet shy with Kolze over some other people. I'm not as high on him. I don't know if you watched who he played. Georgia has some really good competition. The teams that Kolze were playing were not those. What I will say is that Notre Dame's had success with those type of players. And we mentioned this. I mean, obviously you had Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin, Javon McKinley, Ben Skowronek. I mean, they have a lot of success with bringing in 6'3", 6'4" guys that are 50-50 ball guys, turn those 50-50 balls into 90-10 balls. And then I do think Kolze is a good athlete. I don't think that should be overlooked in talking about him. But I wouldn't be surprised if it takes him a couple years to get on the field. I mean, we're seeing it with Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts this year with how hard it's been for them to get on the field. And I think that they were more ready-made than a guy like Kolze. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't really hear Kolze's name in a Notre Dame uniform until like junior, maybe even senior year, at least as like a starter. But he's really talented. Once he gets on the field, once he's in the weight room, and once he's able to kind of get into those, into a college football rhythm and starting and different things like that, I think he could be a really effective player. And then number 10 for me, I actually moved him down after obviously the Kari G, signing today. But Joe Alt, I mean, I know a lot of people don't necessarily think he's a top 10 player in this class when you look at a lot of the other names I didn't mention. But this is kind of an upside pick. He's another guy that might not start at Notre Dame for 3 or 4 years. Especially with all the offensive line talent they bring in. But man, when he finally gets to the weight that he needs to be effective at left tackle or right tackle, or whether it's wherever it's at, he's got the bloodlines, he's got the size, and I think he is already showing that he has the technical part of it too. He was a tight end for the most part of his high school career. And this past year, I think he's already showing that he's going to be more ready to produce earlier on than maybe people were expecting. So that's my top 10.
Let me ask this. And I don't know if maybe this is just random that it happened or if Notre Dame's trying for this. I feel like they're finding more guys with versatility to where they could morph into maybe having to change positions or do a different role. But what I like about that is you're getting multiple rolls of the dice with the same guy, right? And then as good as they are in the weight room and all that, they can shape the body type to an extent, defensively, especially to what they need. I like that kind of flexibility. And I feel like they're starting to find more athletic guys that can do it. And I like that. I really do.
And then one more quick thing. I know we probably want to get going here soon. The thing I really like about what they're doing specifically on defense, they know that getting elite corners, at least from a ranking standpoint, is going to be really difficult. A corner is another one of those positions from an academic standpoint, the cream of the crop. A lot of them are down south that even if they could academically get into Notre Dame, which I'm sure a lot of them can, they don't even have any interest in going to the Midwest. And then the ones that do, you're battling Ohio State, and then you're battling even the teams from down south.
I was going to say the ones that do are in Columbus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one thing I think the staff, specifically the last couple of years, has done, and this isn't even necessarily Mike Mickens, even though Mike Mickens deserves a lot of credit just in general. They're finding receivers that they think can transition to corner, and they're finding guys with just ball skills because of the receiver aspect of it and length that don't necessarily have a lot of corner experience. But man, when you finally give them that chance, and Clarence Lewis, perfect example, was one of the best New Jersey wide receivers in high school football. And I mean, I'll be honest, I have no idea why he wasn't more highly recruited. I didn't think he was going to necessarily be what he was this year for Notre Dame. But go turn on that kid's film from his senior year of high school, and he was a tremendous wide receiver. He should have had so many schools on him just as a receiver more so than anything. And Notre Dame's turned him into, I think he's going to be their next Julian Love at corner. And honestly, probably with more upside because he's got the length. I think he's got a little bit more speed than Love did, and probably even a little bit more versatility as well. But no, I mean, Chance Tucker, he just missed my top 10 at 11. I think he could be a safety. He could be a corner. He reminds me a lot of Clarence Lewis, actually. And I think he's one of those guys that would have been 100% a four-star if he had a senior season. One of my most underrated recruits in the class. Obviously Phillip Reilly, he's already a four-star, but another kid with length and some versatility. But like, for example, Tucker is a kid that is a wide receiver and a corner. JoJo Johnson, who they ended up taking from Indiana, verified good speed, corner and wide receiver at the high school level. And kind of like Clarence Lewis, just a tremendous wide receiver at the high school level. And then you have guys like Ryan Barnes, who was just always going to come to Notre Dame. Once they offered him, it was happening. He wasn't necessarily a wide receiver per se. He was always going to come in as a corner or safety, but another kid with a lot of length and a kid that I think could have been a four-star with the high school year. And then obviously bringing in guys like Kari G and Justin Walters. Those are two guys that I think, when you're getting back to your point, two of the same type of players. One of those guys is probably going to stick at safety, and the other one's going to end up a really good rover at Notre Dame because they have that versatility to do it.
Yeah, I just like the flexibility that provides you, especially when you're a team like Notre Dame that can't oversign, play the tricks with junior college, send your guys there, come up when we need you. So I really like that. I think the staff's doing a really good job with that. So anything else as we wrap up here? 2 hours and 15 minutes, baby.
Still going strong too.
No kidding. I know.
Yeah, that's from a recruiting standpoint, that's pretty much it. I mean, we've talked about it over this 2 hours. It's a good class, man. It's I think people are going to really look back on it and say this is maybe even one of Notre Dame's best, especially if Buckner works out.
Yeah.
He's the key, I think, to this class being elite overall. Because if not, then they're going to have to find some other quarterback, obviously. But
yeah, and that's kind of important,
right.
To make sure you have a dude there. But here's how I'm going to finish. And the way I'm going to finish, it's kind of big picture, but this year at the same time. I feel like from a recruiting standpoint, stability of the program, the off the field stuff we talked about with development, strength and conditioning, all that, on field results. I feel like no matter what happens the rest of the way this year, I feel like we're climbing the ladder a little bit, and it's obvious. We could have said that the last few years. What was missing? One of those wins. One of those wins. I don't care how many of their guys were out. One of those wins. You had to have one to feel confident that we were incrementally moving on up. Even if the rest of these, whatever happens this year, doesn't go well, I'm going to be mad about that. Of course, everybody knows that. But I still feel like we're seeing a more clear trajectory up instead of what was driving me nuts. This 10-2 or whatever, but it's to the only good teams you play. This, I feel like no matter what happens the rest of the way, I'm seeing proof that some progress is being made on the upside. That gives me comfort because that's a big damn deal to me.
Right. No, and you said it. We said it best, I think, a couple weeks ago. We and you talked about this. There are so many games you could look at this year that they would have lost in years past because of some of the turnovers or whatever happened. The game script, they weren't going to be able to overcome it. And not only did they not overcome it, but they ended up, for the most part, blowing those teams out still.
Yep.
So, yeah. No, definitely.
And Nathan, the other thing I talk about on my show all the time is margin. I always talk about in-game margin. And by that, I mean, no matter who you're playing, good team, average team, crappy team, how sloppy can you be and still beat somebody? You know, Notre Dame's playing with the most margin I think I personally remember them having. Like this, you know what I mean? They can get away with not playing great and still end up beating a team. That's a good sign. That shows you got depth. It just shows you that we're starting to outclass some people, even if we're not sharp. And that's what you see Ohio State do. You know, that's what you usually see Clemson do. Obviously, Alabama. But I feel like we're gaining more margin, and that's a great sign.
Yeah. No, I mean, no rebuttal or anything there.
All right, so over 2 hours, 15 minutes. I think we're going to call the rest. We'll see how tomorrow goes. Let's see my mood. Let's see how the game goes. Let's see how many beers I have for breakfast. Like, we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could see you having a complete review if they lose tomorrow, which is the best part about you, though.
Hey, I'm never boring, Nathan. That's what I say. I might be annoying or mean or an idiot or a jerk or whatever. I'm never boring.
We'll be watching.
All right. That's going to be it, everybody. Everybody who joined, thank you. And go Irish, and we'll see how it goes tomorrow. Maybe I'll hop on here if I'm really, really happy or really, really mad. We'll see. Maybe I'll hop on. I don't know.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Have a good night, brother. Go Irish. We'll see y'all tomorrow.